But it sounds to me like you're suggesting they're not really informing the public. And so, in that sense, can the public be an effective part of loyal opposition if they're getting biased news?
Well, I would say that it's up to the public to be an informed citizen and to go out and find out on their own what the issues actually are. The media is the lens which a lot of mainstream America finds out their news from, and they can shape that to whatever vision they want.
Personally, I think it comes back to civic virtue, which the Anti-Federalists and Federalists and the founders all argued about. They argue about it if civic virtue could be best, kept in a large country or in a small. And I think that civic virtue is extremely important because because citizens have an obligation of when they feel that the government has impeded upon their rights, they have a right to a revolution and they need to act.
Do you, polls are a big thing right now. There is, 52% or 47%. How does that interact with the civic, being an informed population? If, in other words, are pollsters polling informed people or random people? So what is the basis for saying somebody is a dominant point of view and therefore organizing some type of a opposition?
Well, it is true that pollers kind of try and choose representative communities of all different political viewpoints. But what I would think is more important that there are different polling agencies that, the Daily Kos does a poll, and that's generally regarded as more of a democratic poll. And so they kind of can shape the questions to give us slim or even a significant majority to the view that they want to represent to America, and that might suggest that people follow that view.
The founders, the Constitution doesn't really contain the idea of political parties, but we've evolved into a country with just two dominant political parties. Do you think that's been good or bad for the concept of a loyal opposition?
I think it's been very beneficial for opposition. I mean, people might cite that, it's causes too much of like a roadblock for legislation to get through. But I feel that this deliberation is essential in order for good bills to be passed, which reflect both views, because these parties offer platforms for people to advocate their views and are a constructive way for people to do so without having to resort to disloyal means.
On that same token, I think that a lot of people point to, well, would it be better if we had a third party system so that not just two parties were feeling against each other and you weren't getting two views? But if you look deeper into the Republican and Democratic parties, you see that there's differing views within those parties, and there's loyal opposition within those parties, such as the Blue Dog Democrats within the Democratic Party provide loyal opposition within that party.
Well, I'm sure I speak for my colleagues in saying there's no doubt in our minds why this team is here competing on Monday after a spirited and wide-ranging conversation like we just had. So I appreciate all the thoughtfulness that went into that. I think it was tremendously important that you, both in your opening statement and in our back and forth, recognize that people have the responsibility to be in opposition even if they're in the same party as the leadership, because I think that's what helps define whether people are acting with integrity. If you can stand up to people in your own party and say, hey, you're acting against the common good, or you're acting against the ideals that this party stands for, that's where I think integrity is a huge part of that, and I appreciated that you brought that into the discussion. I also think it was very important. You had a very consistent theme, I think, even though you disagreed about the historical details, which is entirely appropriate because historians and political scientists are still disagreeing around the Civil War, for example. But you were very consistent in the idea of, are you working within the system? Are you working outside of it? Have you, I think one of you said, and I think it's exactly right, have you exhausted all of your options? And I think that's a really important concept about, because if you look at what the question says, that you're attached to the fundamental principles upon which democratic government is based. And I think that was a theme that really came out in your argument. It was interesting that we got to opinion polls. To me, one thing I'm still trying to puzzle out about healthcare is you have a large number of people saying repeal the bill, but then when you poll people about individual elements of the bill, you find that the individual elements of the bill have widespread support, or at least more than 50% support. And I think that tells us something about how the debate went and whether we were seeing loyal opposition or obstructionism. And unfortunately, we don't have time to dig deeper into that, but you all will as citizens in this democracy, and I'm just glad that you'll be entering the political process and helping us figure these questions out in the years to come. So thanks and congratulations.
To add to my colleague's remarks, I thought your prepared remarks were well organized with strategic placement of pertinent examples, which is always effective. I think you really demonstrated a good understanding in all of your answers. It's not only thematic, but that you understood the interplay, and you again could always draw on recent and past examples that were on target. I think that was a real strength. I didn't articulate the poll question very well, so you're excused. But in any event, I commend you on your preparation. It really showed, and you felt and looked quite comfortable with the material. Good job.
The third judge always gets to say ditto, and so I agree with my colleagues on this. I'll just focus on kind of what I found interesting and unique, and it really does have to do with what my colleague just brought up about discussions of the media. I thought you did a really interesting job in bringing in the whole idea of exchange of ideas. You talked about one of the conditions for loyal, for having the loyal opposition is the idea of a higher order of debate. And you really kind of brought that in. I wish we'd had more time to talk about that because, again, relying on polls, which may be biased, I think it's either 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 in the population who can name all 5 of the freedoms that are in the First Amendment, and 1 in 5 can name all 5 characters on The Simpsons. So we've got kind of different priorities. I think you're right, and I hope that we'll be able to change those odds a little bit. And I'm confident with people like you we can. And so thank you for a very enlightening and enjoyable conversation.